Elena steps into the gala, her calm smile hiding a big secret. Vanessa Hargrove, a charming socialite with a mean streak, dazzles guests but bullies the staff. Elena's sharp eyes hint at a plan to bring Vanessa down. Tonight, one bold move will spark a huge showdown. Elena stood in the cramped staff room of the Grand Meridian Hotel, her fingers working the strings of her black apron with a practiced ease that belied her status as the newest hire. The room buzzed with the frenetic energy of gala night preparations. Trays clattered on metal counters, shoes squeaked against the worn linoleum floor, and the air carried the faint tang of coffee and cleaning supplies. Lockers lined the walls, their chipped paint a testament to years of hurried shifts, and a flickering fluorescent light cast harsh shadows over the space. Elena's dark hair was pulled into a neat bun, her face calm despite the chaos, her movements precise as she tied a perfect knot. Around her, veteran staff darted between supply shelves, their voices low but urgent, trading glances heavy with unspoken dread. Mike, a wiry waiter with a perpetual scowl etched into his weathered face, leaned toward Sarah, a server whose tired eyes carried the weight of too many late nights. "Poor girl," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the clink of glassware, his gaze flicking toward Elena. "She has no idea what she's walking into." Sarah nodded, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her apron stained with faint traces of last night's spills. "She'll find out soon enough. Madame Vanessa never spares the new ones." Their pitying looks lingered, but Elena didn't falter. She smoothed her apron, her fingers brushing the crisp fabric, and hoisted a tray of polished champagne flutes, her steps steady as she headed for the door, leaving the whispers behind. The hotel's grand lobby was a world apart, a glittering stage for the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, casting prisms of light across the marble floors, and the faint hum of a string quartet drifted through the air, mingling with the murmur of arriving guests in tailored suits and shimmering gowns. The gala was hours away, but the space already thrummed with anticipation, the kind that made the staff's shoulders tense and their smiles strained. Then came the spectacle everyone expected. Vanessa Hargrove swept through the entrance, her emerald dress hugging her frame, its silk catching the light with every step. Reporters trailed her like moths to a flame, their cameras flashing in a frenzy, microphones extended as if she were royalty. She waved with a radiant smile, her perfectly manicured hand slicing through the air, her presence commanding every eye in the room. Tomorrow's headlines would gush about her latest charity drive, painting her as a saint in designer heels. But as the cameras pivoted to capture a donor's arrival, her smile vanished like a curtain dropping. She spun toward a young bellboy, barely 18, struggling with a towering stack of luggage. "You're standing there like a donkey. Move," she hissed, her voice low but sharp enough to draw blood. The boy flinched, his face reddening as he scrambled away, the luggage wobbling dangerously. The staff around him dropped their eyes, busying themselves with tasks, adjusting napkins, polishing silver, anything to avoid her gaze. Elena, stationed near the entrance with her tray of welcome drinks, watched the exchange unfold. Her face remained calm, her dark eyes steady, as if she were cataloging every detail of the scene. Elena moved through the pre-gala setup with a grace that turned heads, though few would admit it. New hires typically stumbled, spilling drinks, tripping over their own nerves, or shrinking under the weight of the guests' expectations, but Elena was different. Her hands never wavered as she balanced trays laden with delicate glassware, her steps measured as she delivered champagne to early arrivals, their Rolexes glinting as they reached for flutes. She navigated the crowded lobby with an almost uncanny ease, her polite nods and soft, "good evening," drawing brief smiles from guests who rarely noticed the staff. Tom, a senior waiter with graying temples and a perpetual slouch from years of carrying trays, paused mid-polish on a silver fork, his eyes narrowing as he watched Elena glide past a group of chattering donors. Later, in the service corridor, a narrow, dimly lit passage that smelled faintly of bleach, he caught up with Sarah, wiping sweat from his brow with a crumpled napkin. "She's strange, don't you think?" he said, his voice low, as if Elena might overhear despite being across the room. "Not like the other newbies. It's like she's done this 100 times before." Sarah adjusted her apron, her fingers tugging at a loose thread, her brow furrowing as she glanced at Elena, who was rearranging a tray of canapés with surgical precision. Maybe she's just good at faking it, Sarah said, but her tone carried doubt, her eyes lingering on Elena's calm silhouette. The cocktail hour brought the first real test of the night. Vanessa sat at a prime table, surrounded by her entourage of sycophants, local influencers, a minor politician, and a hedge fund manager who laughed too loudly at her jokes. Her diamond bracelet glinted as she beckoned Elena over with a flick of her wrist, her smile sharp and predatory, like a cat toying with prey. The nearby staff stiffened, recognizing the glint in her eye. Elena approached, a fresh glass of champagne balanced on her tray, her steps unhurried despite the weight of Vanessa's stare. "Oh, a fresh face," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness, loud enough to draw the attention of nearby tables. "Let's see how long you last, darling." The words were a gauntlet, a challenge that had broken countless others before her. The servers nearby, Mike, Sarah, and a young busboy named Jake, exchanged tense glances, their hands pausing mid-task. They knew this script. Vanessa's taunts were only the beginning. Elena set the glass down with care, her movements fluid, and met Vanessa's gaze for a fleeting second, her expression unreadable. "Enjoy your evening, ma'am," she said softly, her voice steady as she stepped back, turning to serve another table. The moment passed, but the air felt heavier, the staff bracing for what would come next. Dinner service turned the heat up. The dining room was a symphony of clinking cutlery, murmured conversations, and the occasional burst of laughter from guests basking in their own importance. Vanessa held court at her table, her laughter loud and performative, her gestures drawing every eye. Elena moved through the room, delivering plates of seared scallops and roasted quail with the same quiet precision, her presence almost invisible until Vanessa's gaze found her again. As Elena passed with a tray of entrees, Vanessa shifted in her chair, her elbow catching Elena's arm with just enough force to send a water glass tumbling. It hit the tablecloth with a muffled thud, water splashing across the pristine white linen, soaking into the fabric like a spreading bruise. Vanessa's eyes gleamed with delight as she leaned back, her voice rising for her table's amusement. "Clumsy little thing," she said, the words sharp and deliberate, loud enough for nearby guests to turn their heads. Her friends chuckled, one murmuring something about the help these days, their laughter a cruel echo. Elena paused, the room's attention prickling her skin like static, but she didn't flinch. "Sorry, ma'am," she said, her tone polite, almost serene, as she grabbed a napkin and blotted the spill with steady hands. The staff braced for the usual fallout, tears, a trembling lip, a hurried retreat to the kitchen, but Elena finished cleaning, tucked the napkin away, and continued serving, her expression unchanged, as if the incident were a fleeting inconvenience. In the break room during a rare lull, the staff gathered around a wobbly table, their voices hushed as they decompressed over lukewarm coffee. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in with the weight of their shared exhaustion. Mike slumped into a chair, his fingers rubbing his temples as if to ward off a headache. "She's always like this," he said, his voice thick with frustration. "All smiles for the cameras, but the second they're off, she tears us apart." Sarah set her coffee cup down with a clatter, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "We can't do anything about it," she said, her voice low but fierce. "She's too connected, knows everyone who matters. Try reporting her, and you're out the door before you can blink." The others nodded, their faces etched with the resignation of years under Vanessa's thumb. Elena stood near the back, leaning against a locker, her hands folded around a small black notebook, its edges worn from use. She listened without speaking, her pen moving quickly as she jotted something down, her strokes precise and purposeful. Tom, wiping his hands on his apron, noticed, his curiosity piqued. "What's with the notebook, Elena?" he asked, his tone half joking, half wary. "Writing your resignation already?" She looked up, closing the notebook with a faint smile that revealed nothing. "Just keeping track of things," she said, her voice soft but carrying an edge of intent. "You never know when you'll need to remember how this place really works." The room fell quiet, her words hanging in the air like a spark waiting to catch. Mike raised an eyebrow, leaning forward in his chair. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, his voice tinged with suspicion, but Elena only smiled, tucking the notebook into her apron pocket. Sarah clutched her coffee mug, her knuckles whitening, while Tom shifted uncomfortably, his apron bunched in his hands. The other staff, Jake, the young dishwasher, and a few busboys, watched Elena, their faces a mix of exhaustion and intrigue. Elena stood by the locker, her small black notebook now tucked into her apron pocket, her smile faint but unshaken. She tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes meeting Mike's without a trace of fear. "It means I'm paying attention," she said, her voice soft but deliberate, each word landing like a carefully placed step. "This place runs on more than just trays and smiles. You know that better than anyone." Her words were calm, almost gentle, but they carried a weight that made Mike's scowl falter. He opened his mouth to respond, but the sharp buzz of the service bell cut through, signaling the end of their break. Elena adjusted her apron, her movements precise, and headed for the door. "Back to it," she said, her tone light but final, leaving the staff to exchange uneasy glances as they followed her out, their footsteps heavier than hers. The lobby had transformed into a polished spectacle, the gala's energy now a tightly choreographed dance of wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the marble floors, and the air buzzed with the clink of glasses and the low hum of flattery. Vanessa Hargrove stood on a small stage at the far end, bathed in the soft glow of a spotlight, her emerald dress shimmering like liquid glass. A cluster of reporters and donors gathered below, their faces eager as she spoke of her latest charity initiative, a fund for underprivileged youth, her voice warm and earnest. "It's about giving back," she said, her smile radiant, her gestures sweeping as cameras clicked furiously. "The staff, the community, they're the heart of this city, and I'm proud to uplift them." The words were honeyed, drawing nods and murmurs of approval, but the staff knew the truth behind her performance. Vanessa's eyes scanned the crowd, landing on a group of servers near the stage. She beckoned them forward, her smile widening for the cameras. "Come, join me," she said, her voice carrying a practiced warmth. Elena, standing among the servers with a tray of champagne, stepped onto the stage with her usual calm, her face composed despite the weight of Vanessa's gaze. As the flashes popped, Vanessa draped an arm around Elena, her grip tight, her nails digging slightly into Elena's shoulder. She leaned close, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for Elena, her breath hot against her ear. "Try not to embarrass me, little waitress." The words were venomous, a stark contrast to the smile she flashed for the reporters. Elena didn't flinch, her eyes meeting Vanessa's for a brief, unflinching moment before she offered a polite nod and stepped back, blending into the line of staff behind her. The reporters scribbled notes, oblivious to the tension, their pens racing to capture Vanessa's kindness. Later, as the crowd mingled, Vanessa's cruelty sharpened like a blade honed for precision. The dining room was a swirl of opulence. White tablecloths gleamed under candlelight, the scent of roasted lamb and truffle oil hung in the air, and guests laughed over glasses of Bordeaux. Elena was clearing empty glasses from a table near the center, her movements swift but silent. When Vanessa approached, a glass of red wine cradled in her manicured hand. Her eyes glinted with intent, and the nearby staff, Mike wiping down a tray and Sarah refilling water pitchers, stiffened, sensing the storm. Vanessa paused beside Elena, her smile curling into something predatory. Then, with a deliberate tilt of her wrist, she let the wine splash across Elena's uniform. The deep red stained the cheap black fabric, spreading like a wound across her chest. Vanessa stepped back, her lips twisting into a smirk. "This cheap fabric, it suits you," she said, her voice loud enough to draw chuckles from nearby guests, who glanced over with amused disdain. The staff froze, their eyes darting away in practiced shame, their hands pausing mid-task. Mike's jaw tightened, and Sarah's fingers gripped her pitcher until her knuckles paled. Elena, however, didn't react. She pulled a napkin from her tray and dabbed at the stain, her movements unhurried, her face as calm as ever. "I'll take care of it, ma'am," she said, her tone polite, almost serene, before turning to continue her work. The guests moved on, their laughter resuming, but the moment lingered like a bruise, the staff's unease palpable in the air. In the kitchen, during a brief moment of reprieve, the clatter of pots and the hiss of steam provided a temporary shield from the gala's glare. Elena stood near a prep counter, swapping her soiled apron for a fresh one, her fingers tying the strings with the same precision she brought to every task. Jake, the young dishwasher, his hands still pruning from hours in the sink, caught her as he hauled a stack of plates to the washer. His face was flushed, his eyes wide with the raw frustration of someone new to Vanessa's games. "Why don't you fight back?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly, his hands pausing on the plates. "She humiliates everyone, and you just take it. Why?" Elena looked at him, her eyes soft but unwavering, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She finished tying her apron before responding, her voice low but steady, like a current beneath still water. "Sometimes silence is stronger than anger," she said. "It's not about taking it, it's about choosing when to act. Just watch." Jake blinked, his brow furrowing as he tried to parse her words, but they stuck with him, echoing as he returned to his dishes. He glanced back at her as she headed for the dining room, her silhouette framed briefly in the doorway, a quiet enigma against the kitchen's chaos. The next day, Vanessa's torment continued, relentless as a tide. She swept through the hotel's private dining suite for a luncheon, her entourage trailing her like a royal court, her laughter sharp and performative. She snapped at a busboy for a smudge on a glass, berated Sarah for a slightly wrinkled tablecloth, and dismissed Mike with a flick of her hand when he offered her a menu. Through it all, Elena remained a steady presence, delivering trays, clearing plates, and absorbing Vanessa's barbs with an unshakable calm that became the talk of the staff. Between shifts, they gathered in the service corridor, a narrow hallway lined with cleaning carts and smelling faintly of bleach. Sarah caught Mike by the coffee machine, her hands gripping her mug tightly, her voice low but urgent. "She doesn't crack," she said, glancing toward Elena, who was arranging napkins with surgical precision at a nearby station. "No one's lasted this long without breaking. Not with Vanessa." Mike nodded, his usual scowl softened by a flicker of admiration. "It's like she knows something we don't," he said, his eyes narrowing as Elena passed by, offering a small smile that revealed nothing. The staff's whispers grew, a mix of awe and suspicion, their conversations circling around her like moths around a flame. Jake, lingering nearby with a mop, caught snippets and shook his head, muttering to himself, "She's gotta be up to something." That night, after the gala crowd had thinned and the hotel settled into an uneasy quiet, Elena lingered in the service office, a small room cluttered with schedules, complaint logs, and a flickering computer screen casting blue light across the walls. She sat at the desk, her posture straight but relaxed, flipping through service records with a focus that bordered on obsessive. Her small black notebook lay open beside her, its pages filled with neat rows of timestamps, names, and brief notes in her precise handwriting. She paused to review grainy CCTV footage from the previous night, her eyes scanning the screen as Vanessa's sharp gestures and whispered barbs played out in silent black and white. A security guard named Carl, making his rounds with a flashlight, paused in the doorway, his beam catching Elena's profile. His brow furrowed, his hand resting on his radio as he took in the scene. "What are you doing here so late?" he asked, his tone more curious than accusing, though his eyes narrowed slightly. Elena looked up, her smile disarming, her hands pausing on the keyboard. "Just making sure I understand how this place really works," she said, her voice calm but carrying a hint of purpose. She closed the notebook with a soft snap, her fingers brushing its worn edges. Carl frowned, his grip tightening on his flashlight. "What kind of waitress talks like that?" he muttered, half to himself, but he stepped back, shaking his head as he continued his rounds, leaving Elena to her quiet work. The service office felt smaller in the late-night quiet, the hum of the gala reduced to a distant murmur beyond the walls. The flickering computer screen cast a pale blue glow across Elena's face as she sat at the cluttered desk, her small black notebook open, its pages dense with precise notes, timestamps, names, and snippets of Vanessa's venom captured in ink. Carl's question, "What kind of waitress talks like that?" lingered in the air, his flashlight beam still hovering on her profile. Elena's smile didn't waver as she met his gaze, her fingers brushing the worn edges of her notebook before closing it with a soft snap. "The kind who cares about getting things right," she said, her voice calm but carrying a quiet authority that made Carl's frown deepen. His hand lingered on his radio, his eyes narrowing as if trying to solve a puzzle, but the weight of her words and the steadiness of her gaze unsettled him. He muttered something under his breath, the beam of his flashlight dipping as he turned away, his heavy footsteps echoing down the corridor. Elena waited until he was gone, then turned back to the screen, her fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard, pulling up another clip of CCTV footage. Vanessa's sharp gestures and whispered barbs played out in grainy black and white, each moment a piece of the truth Elena had been collecting. She leaned back, her eyes narrowing slightly, a faint smile tugging at her lips as if she could already see the storm coming. The Grand Meridian's ballroom was a vision of opulence by the time the gala reached its peak, the air thick with the scent of jasmine from towering floral arrangements and the clink of crystal glasses raised in toasts. Golden light spilled from chandeliers, dancing across the polished marble floor, and guests in tailored tuxedos and shimmering gowns swirled through the space, their laughter polished but tinged with self-awareness. Vanessa Hargrove stood at the heart of it all, her emerald dress catching every light, her movements deliberate as she mingled with donors, influencers, and minor celebrities. Her smile was a masterpiece, radiant and untouchable, her diamond earrings glinting like tiny beacons of her status. She tossed her head back, laughing at a tech mogul's joke, her hand grazing his arm with practiced charm, while reporters scribbled notes, their pens racing to capture her as the evening's benevolent star. The staff moved like shadows, their black uniforms blending into the background as they balanced trays of champagne and delicate canapes, their faces tight with the strain of Vanessa's earlier cruelties. Elena, however, glided through the chaos with an unshakable calm, her apron crisp despite the wine stain from the previous night, her dark eyes scanning the room with a purpose that seemed to pierce through the glamour. Mike, stationed near a service table, caught her passing and muttered to Sarah, "She's too calm. It's unnatural." Sarah, adjusting a stack of napkins, nodded, her brow furrowed. "She's up to something," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the quartet's soft strains. The air tightened when Vanessa's gaze found Elena again, like a predator locking onto prey. She stepped away from her admirers, her heels clicking sharply on the marble, and approached Elena as she set down a tray of champagne flutes near a cluster of guests. The crowd's hum faded slightly as Vanessa raised her voice, her tone dripping with disdain, loud enough to draw every eye in the vicinity. "Look at this waitress," she said, her words slicing through the chatter. "Cheap, clumsy, pathetic." She reached out, her manicured fingers snagging the sleeve of Elena's uniform, and with a deliberate, theatrical tug, she tore it. The fabric ripped with a harsh sound, exposing Elena's shoulder, the frayed edges hanging limply. Vanessa laughed, a sharp, performative sound that echoed across the ballroom. "See? Even her dress falls apart." Gasps rippled through the crowd, guests leaning forward, their whispers buzzing like static. A woman in a sapphire gown murmured to her companion, "How cruel," while another, clutching a pearl necklace, added, "Who does that?" The staff froze, their faces pale. Vanessa's cruelty had always been a private torment, never this bold, never this public. Mike's hands clenched around his tray, Sarah's breath caught, and Jake, lingering near the back, stared wide-eyed, his mop forgotten. They waited for Elena to crumble, as so many before her had. But Elena didn't crumble. She stood still, the torn sleeve dangling, her posture straight, her eyes locked on Vanessa's with a quiet intensity that sent a ripple of unease through the room. A faint, confident smile curved her lips, and the guests' murmurs grew louder. "Why isn't she crying?" a man in a tuxedo whispered, leaning toward his date. "Who is she?" another asked, craning her neck for a better view. The staff exchanged glances, their earlier suspicions about Elena flaring into something closer to awe. Mike, his voice low, muttered to Sarah, "She's not breaking. Not even now." Sarah's tray trembled slightly in her hands, her eyes wide as she watched Elena stand tall, unshaken, her presence somehow commanding despite the torn uniform. Vanessa's smirk faltered, just for a moment, as if she sensed something slipping out of her control. The heavy ballroom doors swung open with a low groan, cutting through the tension like a blade. A man stepped in, his presence silencing the room in an instant. Tall, with a tailored black suit that spoke of understated power, he moved with a calm authority that demanded respect. Daniel Warwick, the billionaire owner of the Grand Meridian, carried himself with a quiet intensity, his sharp eyes sweeping the room as the crowd rose almost instinctively, chairs scraping softly against the floor. Vanessa straightened, her smile widening, sensing an opportunity to cement her influence. She gestured toward Elena, her voice smooth but edged with triumph, loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "Mr. Warwick, your staff is embarrassing your hotel. Look at this girl, her uniform's in tatters." She expected a nod, a murmur of agreement, perhaps a public reprimand to bolster her own standing. But Daniel's gaze didn't linger on her. He crossed the room with measured steps, his polished shoes clicking softly, his eyes fixed on Elena as if no one else existed. The room held its breath as Daniel reached Elena. Without a word, he slipped off his jacket, the fabric rustling softly, and draped it gently over her shoulders, covering the torn sleeve with a tenderness that felt almost sacred. His hands lingered for a moment, steadying her, before he turned to face the crowd. His voice was steady, resonant, carrying a weight that silenced every whisper. "My wife doesn't need to prove herself to anyone," he said, his eyes sweeping the room before landing on Vanessa, who stood frozen, her face draining of color. "Not to someone who bullies staff while pretending to love them in front of cameras." The words hit like a thunderclap, the crowd erupting in gasps and murmurs. Vanessa's smile shattered, her hands trembling as she clutched her wine glass, the mask of her carefully crafted persona crumbling. The staff stood stunned. Mike dropped a glass, its shatter lost in the roar. Sarah's tray wobbled, her breath catching, and Jake's jaw fell open, his eyes wide with disbelief. The guests buzzed, phones already out, capturing the moment that would redefine the night. Elena stepped forward, her voice calm but clear, cutting through the chaos like a beacon. "For weeks, I've watched how this hotel runs," she said, her gaze steady on Vanessa, her words carrying the weight of truth. "I've seen the fear you spread, the way you hide cruelty behind charity. I took this job to understand the truth, not just for me but for them." She nodded toward the staff, who stood straighter, their eyes gleaming with a mix of pride and relief. Her notebook, tucked away, held weeks of evidence, timestamps, complaints, footage of Vanessa's private venom, gathered not as a waitress, but as someone with the power to change things. The crowd's murmurs grew, some guests nodding in quiet respect, others whispering in shock. Vanessa's face crumpled, her hands shaking as she realized the depth of her exposure. The fallout was immediate and merciless. A young influencer, her phone already recording, uploaded the moment to X, the clip spreading like wildfire across the platform. By dawn, the video had millions of views, Vanessa's public humiliation looping on screens worldwide. Headlines flipped overnight. Her charity facade was shredded, replaced by exposés of her cruelty. Donors pulled funding, sponsors severed ties, and her social circle evaporated as influencers and elites distanced themselves. Vanessa, desperate to salvage her image, appeared on live television the next day, her voice trembling as she addressed Elena directly. "I was wrong," she said, her eyes downcast, her hands clasped tightly. "I'm sorry for what I did to you and the staff." The apology rang hollow to those who knew her, but the damage was done. Her empire of influence lay in ruins. Back at the Grand Meridian, the staff gathered in the breakroom, the air lighter than it had been in years. The chipped lockers and wobbly table felt less oppressive now, the faint scent of coffee almost comforting. Mike leaned against the wall, a rare grin breaking through his usual scowl. "Can't believe she was his wife," he said, shaking his head, his voice tinged with admiration. Sarah poured coffee for the group, her laughter soft but genuine. "She didn't just take down Vanessa, she gave us a voice," she said, her eyes bright as she glanced at Elena, who stood quietly among them, her jacket replaced with a fresh uniform. Jake, still processing, leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees. "You planned this all along, didn't you?" he asked, his voice a mix of awe and curiosity. Elena smiled, her eyes warm, her presence steady as ever. "Sometimes, you have to walk in someone else's shoes to fix what's broken," she said, her words simple but resonant. The staff nodded, their respect for her unspoken but palpable, their shared silence a testament to the change she'd brought. The Grand Meridian felt different now, its halls lighter, its workers bolder, because of Elena's quiet strength and unwavering resolve. If you like this story, hit that like button to let us know. Share this story with someone who needs a spark of hope, and subscribe to join us for more tales of human strength and unexpected victories. Your support keeps these stories alive, and we can't wait to bring you the next one.